Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, will now proceed with our first panel discussion titled Driving Decarbonization in ASEAN Infrastructure. Well, it will be an engagement. On the screen will be the QR code. If you're not downloaded the app already, will be a good gateway once again for you to pose questions to our moderator. Gives me great pleasure to now invite our stellar panelists to join us on stage to take their seats, starting firstly with Mr. Nilesh Jadhav, Head for Energy and Performance Services from Siemens Private Limited. Let's give him a big warm welcome, please. Dr. Priyantha Wijayatunga, Senior Director, Energy Sector Office Sectors Group, Singapore, Asian Development Bank. Dr. Priyantha, always a pleasure. Ibu Sylvi Gani, Director of Financing and Investment, PT Sarana Infrastruktur, Persero. Let's give her a big warm welcome, please. Dr. Zulfikar, Yurnaidi, Manager of Energy Modeling and Policy Planning, ASEAN Center for Energy. A big warm welcome, please. And Lynn, once again, will be our moderator, working very, very hard for us. Partner for ASEAN Infrastructure Advisory Leader, Strategy and Transaction, Ernst Solution. Welcome back, Lynn. So, ladies and gentlemen, the app once again will be our gateway to pose your questions. Before I hand the session over to Lynn, join me in giving the panel a big warm welcome, please. Thank you very much. And Lynn, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, I really dislike the lights. I don't know why we do it. You can see all my wrinkles. No, thank you very much for the esteemed panel members. They've been very carefully selected from a public sector, private sector solutions provider, and also what we always need from an ASEAN perspective as well, where some of the policy direction is heading. So I hope this will be an interesting panel. And maybe I'll throw to Dr. Zul the first question. You're sitting there as one of the ASEAN governmental organizations, looking at the pace of change, looking at really what policies are driving. And I know you started to look at the 7 prongs from before. That's looked at, signing up to the COP26 targets. Where do you think we can go next in terms of accelerating the pace of decarbonization from a regional perspective?
Okay, thank you. I think as you hinted during your presentations, I think one of the issues for ASEAN is on how we can optimize the limited fiscal capacity that we have. At one point, we realized that there are no one-fit solutions for all. But at the same time, there are various technological policy options out there that would be very useful for us to achieve our energy transitions. We have to explore hydrogen, we have to explore infrastructure, especially in interconnection, of course, bioenergy, etc., etc. Those are the solutions that we really need. And how to channel this financing is the questions that we want to address today. So answering your questions, we are currently in the process of developing the next cycle of the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperations. We call it the APAEC. It's ending in 2025. We have 2 targets over there, renewable energy and energy efficiency. We are in the good progress in terms of renewable energy targets in installed power capacity. We are going to overachieve our target even, but we do have challenges in terms of renewable energy in primary energy supply, meaning we have to include the transport sector, industry sector, all those, the hard to decarbonize sector, and also a little bit challenge in energy efficiency. So our short-term target until 2025 is how we can achieve our target that we set before. At the same time, we are currently designing the next cycle of APAEC, which is 2026 until 2035, and maybe even longer until 2045 to meet the long-term targets. By balancing what we are currently doing, but at the same time with the needs that we also set through our net zero targets, our NDC targets, etc., etc. And this is for ASEAN member states to decide, but from our perspective, from ACE perspective, what we feel is that there are a lot of discussions centered on the interconnectivity. So again, what you just mentioned right now, how we as a regions can collaborate together so we can achieve our national, but also our regional targets. And this has been shown by like several initiatives in the region. For example, like this year during Indonesia chairmanship, we launched what we call the leader declarations for EV ecosystem. So meaning how we as a regions can build the supply chain for EV so that we can not only, so we can basically benefit from these energy transitions. So again, another important factor for successful energy transition is just and inclusive. How we can frame this energy transition into something that benefits us economically, socially, and of course, environmentally. So I think those are, in general, the things that we want to push. Part of interconnectivity, the big one is, of course, the ASEAN power grid. But but interconnectivity is not only about electricity; it's also about our security in oil and gas in the future, maybe in terms of hydrogen, interconnectivity in terms of bioenergy, and also all of this supply chain infrastructure. So again, like highlighting the different approaches, they have their own strength, that how we can aggregate it so that like 10 countries, when they're working together, it equals like 100, for example. So that's the idea.
Thank you. No, it's really heartening to see actually the level of activity and the level of discussion and engagement between the countries. Working with the ASEAN sector, it's not easy. It's a form of persuasion and collaboration, I think, which is very, very strong currently throughout ASEAN. So thank you for that. And you've touched on energy, you've touched on transport. All these are key areas that can't be forgotten. And very important is the a social compact with the people as well. They are the users and the consumers. We might build the infrastructure, but if the users, consumers feel that it's not politically acceptable, then we understand the ramifications as well. Maybe from a regional level, perhaps we go to Ibu Sylvi. Lots and lots of attention on Indonesia and your transition as well, given the scale and the growth in Indonesian economy and things like that. So Ibu Sylvi has been a banker and financier for many years, and so very, very familiar with the challenges of bringing finance and PTMSI being SMI being pretty much Indonesia's leading DFI. Maybe sharing some of your thoughts in some of the challenges in moving this needle.
Okay, Lynn, thank you. As you may know, that Indonesia has a robust and aggressive plan for decarbonization, and particularly on the energy sector. But we are also developing. And I know that the government want to maintain the economic growth. So the balancing between the ambition to achieve the decarbonization and also to ensure that the energy is still affordable, sustainable, and reliable is a big task, is an issue. So we're expecting that the government to support the decarbonization will prepare, which is, I understand this is underway, a roadmap for the transition. So everyone is clear what we're going to achieve and how. And from the roadmap, I think the government will build up the pipeline. So we're expecting that from the roadmap is also the regulation that's supporting the transition will be aligned, because one of the issue that lack of alignment of the regulation that's supporting the transition itself. The second thing, Indonesia is unique. We have thousands of islands, and the demand is actually concentrated only in Java and Sumatra, which account for 70% of GDP. While the resources for renewable is not in Java and Sumatra. In fact, part of them is in Sumatra. We need to build the power infrastructure, the power grid, interconnected, that connecting the resource and the demand. Or, this is what government will do also, distribute the demand evenly. So because this is very important. And to be able to build or construct more renewable, which is faster in terms of transition. For example, the wind and solar, we still need the smart grid. So it can serve the variable renewables such as wind and solar. The third thing's also the financing. As you mentioned, Lynn, that money is not an issue, but how we can allocate this huge of funding and also the funding needs into the right project and suitable project is an issue. The pipeline is important, the roadmap is important. So as a country platform, PTSMI is expected, or one of the roles as a country platform is to mobilize the fund for this transition. But without the roadmap, it's very difficult for us to allocate the funding into the right project. Thank you, Lynn.
So it's in the part prioritization.
Correct.
As well, ensuring that there is clarity on how the money is being utilized. And also, I think the issue that we always talk about funding is, funding is not, there's all sorts of funding. There's grant funding, there's commercial funding, there's concessional funding. Also is designing the projects which deserve the different types of funding to be catalytic as well. I think your point on aligning the regulations for clarity, financing infrastructure is a long-term business. So understanding the environment that you're funding and to get a set of returns is critical as well. And I guess then I'll look to our colleague next to Dr. Priyantha. How is the ADB collaborating with the likes of Ibu Sylvi and PTSMI to achieve this outcome for Indonesia and across the region?
Yep. First of all, let me thank the organizers for inviting ADB to be part of this panel, which is very important. And also to Lynn for setting the scene very well.
Thank you.
Covering the most important parts of the game. As far as ADB is concerned, to start off with, we call ourselves the climate bank of the Asia and the Pacific, right? And the reason being that our focus is very much on addressing decarbonization, addressing the climate challenge. But at the same time, being a development bank, obviously we have to balance that along with other requirements in the energy sector, particularly the energy access and the quality of supplies and so on and so forth. So we are trying to balance all this. In fact, we came up with our energy policy, which after almost 12 years of having the previous one, in 2021, based on 5 principles. The first is, of course, foremost is the energy access. That's very important. And the second being addressing the climate part of it. So the second principle. And the third is, in fact, working across sectors with other sectors. We cannot work alone as energy, but our energy sector interventions will have to be cross-sectoral most of the time. And then regional cooperation is naturally a most important factor. And you can't do any of these things unless you have the right governance in the sector. So you have to look at the governance, and as a result, as you quite rightly pointed out, financial sustainability is very important. And that means if you want to raise the capital requirements for energy transition, you need to have private sector. It's quite obvious that government cannot do everything. In fact, government can do only very little as against the overall investment requirements in the sector. So you need to have the right kind of governance. So these 5 principles basically depict exactly what we are doing in ADB and what we need to do. So as far as ASEAN region is concerned, of course, it's quite unique because it drives, I must say, the global economic growth. And that's a very important part. And at the same time, obviously, it has the biggest stock of fossil fuel-based infrastructure, and you need to decarbonize. Therefore, not only you should look at what is coming in the future in terms of demand and addressing the needs and making sure that demand is met through clean energy solutions. But also you have to look at the existing stock and to do something about it, and which we have not been concentrating too much in the past. So we have brought in this, as you know, energy transition mechanism, and where Indonesia is playing a very important role as the first pilot project coming up. Hopefully we'll pull off a good deal before COP28. I'm not sure yet, but that's the first pilot which we are going to have, where we are trying to accelerate decommissioning of a coal power plant, and of course bringing in necessary incentives to do that, at least 10-15 years, and demonstrate that's possible. And the financial structures are possible to do that without hurting anybody. And for that, we need to bring not only our own financing, but also concessionary financing. Philanthropies will have to come, because naturally the capital, the financing which is going to replace the existing financing structure will have to be cheaper. Otherwise, you cannot decommission a power plant earlier. So we try to demonstrate. So there we work with everybody, not just with the government of Indonesia, but also the private sector, the owners of these power plants. And also we need to really carefully look at the people who are affected by such decommissioning. And it's not easy just to decide and decommission a power plant. And the utility which purchases this power will have to think of what is going to replace this power. It's not easy. And you have to provide the same energy services, and you have to bring in the replacement with the same energy services, not just kilowatt hours, but the kilowatt hours at the right reliability, at the right time you require it, and so on and so forth. And then when you do that, obviously decommissioning involves affected communities. And these are coal power plants, and you have coal mining involved. You have everybody who, from the UK, what it happened when the coal mines were closed. Now you can see, towns and towns, suffering from those decommissioning. So we need to look at that, and we are concentrating on that aspect also, just energy transition. So just part is also as important as the rest of it. So we are working with all these different stakeholders, and hopefully we'll be able to pull off this first pilot project, and which can be replicated. Yeah.
I think it's. I think you've captured it quite well. Whilst I think the ADB is, like I say, a climate change bank. It's your new name, so it's now CCB. Okay. But like you rightly say, to get to the outcomes, and I'm really sort of heartened that you said it's looking at the overall impact of that one change in the infrastructure. You have the industrial impact, like we say, the coal mine jobs. How do you replace it? You have the users to make sure that the price of electricity that runs their business is kept consistent and, more importantly, stable as well. And I think this is where the nub is for decarbonizing infrastructure. It's not changing your installed capacity. It's looking at the end-to-end, which means that very, very, I guess, many stakeholders involved, that collaborative effect is truly collaborative, because you can't do one without achieving. You can change the renewables, but it's not going to achieve the outcomes in its fullest extent. So, I think ADB has a critical job in this sense. And I guess not last but not least, everyone talks about private sector. There's private sector funding, private sector management expertise, and we talked a lot about technology. I think technology is so important. I mean, it drives sort of innovation, efficiency at so many levels, and Siemens plays a very critical role in it, because at the end of the day, technology allows us to do this. We go from metering, which educates the consumer. We look at energy efficiency, which makes coal plants cleaner. And you're very much in the EV side as well, and the power and renewables. So maybe a few thoughts from your end as you see how private sector, are we playing enough of a role? Do you need more support? How do you scale up as well in terms of helping governments get there and sensibly make a profit?
Thanks, firstly, glad to be here. Good morning to all of you. I think it's a very interesting question. We always talk about policy, technology, and money, right, as the key drivers of the transition to a net zero world, let's say. So from the technology point of view, I've dabbled a little bit. My story is that until 14 years ago, I was working for a oil and petrochemical company, and I naively decided to step out of it and focus on clean technology. Did some bit of research in a university, was in charge of campus sustainability program, and then I had some exposure to newer technologies on the buildings domain, especially. So I think firstly, which sector do we apply the technology to? In my view, it was highlighted in the morning that energy sector is about 2/3, if I remember the number, rightly so. And within that, I would say buildings, transportation, and industry would be the key sectors to decarbonize. So, and then actually I had an exposure to look at how we could make policies and think about technology evolvement, and happened to work with SEAS, the Sustainable Energy Association, and thanks SEAS and also the Infrastructure Asia for inviting me here to talk about this. But essentially what we talk about always revolve around these three topics of policy, technology, and money. So zooming into technology, as you rightly said, Siemens being a technology-focused company, firstly, we ourselves have committed as a corporate and a private sector company to be carbon neutral by 2030, and we are working on our net zero goals for the longer term as well. So essentially, apart from that, we also see ourselves as a bigger role in supporting the transition, decarbonization transition for our customers and for the partners. To give an example, in terms of scopes of emissions, 90% of emissions of Siemens as a company comes from scope 3. And that's because of the electrical power that our devices used in applications. So how do we design them better? How do we basically come up with a way for our customers to use lesser energy? And that's what we're thinking about. So I would just say on the technology topic, we are now looking at 5 key levers of decarbonization across the different sectors that I mentioned. First one is really to start with reduction, energy efficiency. I think that's where what we're all talking about here. A lot of opportunities in the industry sector. We have done a lot on buildings in Singapore. It has to be propagated to the rest of the region, and transportation as well. How do we be more efficient in using energy in transportation? The second thing I would say is producing clean energy, and I think that's something which is often overlooked. We heard about net zero buildings in Singapore and in other places as well. How do buildings produce energy on site? How do industries produce energy? How do they move towards producing energy through cleaner ways? Could they use hydrogen? Could they use biofuels? Could we use renewable energy like solar, wind, etc.? So that's the second lever. The third one I would say is more towards electrification, and you pointed out, Lynn, earlier. That's one of the key levers. How do we electrify heating, for example, heating and cooling? And those would be the key energy transition technology that we need to achieve. So that's the 3 core, and then I would say the fourth one would be on procuring clean energy. So beyond the technology infrastructure, how do we procure clean energy in the right way? And that's where the policy framework comes in, allowing, let's say, access to clean power from far and beyond. And I think what Singapore is doing now is to import low carbon electricity from the region, which is a great step. And how do we then integrate that? What kind of technologies would enable it? For example, the grid technologies, the microgrids. These are the technologies that would play a part there. And lastly, I would say the fifth lever would be on really removing carbon from the atmosphere. And then we're talking about carbon capture, and maybe through the offset mechanism to some extent, carefully, but all really looking at technologies to remove carbon from the environment. I think all these 5 levers play a hand, and technology is definitely a big enabler. I would say lastly, just to conclude, along with these 5 levers, we have to also think about digitalization. I think that's a core underlying principle that most companies will look at. Interestingly, Siemens also did an infrastructure transition monitor. Recently, we interviewed about 1,400 top, let's say, CEOs and CXOs around the world, and we actually found that the world is quite divided, and I think we can see it here on who would play a part in the transition. It divided on whether governments are doing enough, divided on the technology front as well. But if you look at technology, some of the technology winners, or what popular, let's say, voting goes to, is on energy storage, is on remote energy monitoring. And I think that's digitalization part can play a big role there. How do you monitor? How do you make sure that your energy requirements are met today? How could they be monitored on a continuous basis, and possibly use that mechanism of data approach? And now you talk about AI, you talk about new technologies there, to think about using that knowledge information to digitalize and thereby decarbonize in the long run. Thanks.
Just before we move on to maybe the audience, I wanted to pick up on your last point. Clearly, the next big leap in technology is AI. I mean, from your private sector point of view, I think your levers are very, very useful and clear in how we should think about collectively bringing down and achieving the targets. Do you think AI will have the intended impact that we all hope for in propelling some of the movements and achievements within your 5 levers? Because you touched on it very briefly, teasing us with AI.
Sure. Yeah, I think AI definitely would play a big role. And I think we have seen generative AI becoming very popular. So if you use ChatGPT and other AI technologies. But more than that, I think we have just kind of at the tip of the iceberg, we have not really exploited AI so much. Where I think AI would play a big role is really to understand the consumption patterns and then predict the future energy usage.
Right.
Right. I think that's the core benefit that we can get. So now we are looking at AI being applied to looking at patterns. For example, in buildings, how do we identify patterns? How do we learn from weather changes that are happening? How do we learn from patterns of weather? And could we adapt our operations based on that? I think that's where where humans might fall short. We would put the best operators to run the chiller units in buildings, or best operators to run the power sector. Then we would have a gap in terms of humans being able to process so much data. Data is coming around. We have remote energy monitoring happening everywhere. How would we use that data? I think that's the important thing. We have been collecting data for a long run. Policymakers collect data. Technology providers provide the data or collect data as well. And banks definitely need the data. Financial institutions definitely need data. So how would that data be then utilized? I think that's, to me, the core technology will be really AI. And now we talk about the combination of the real and virtual worlds. I think many technology companies are looking at that. How do you combine the virtual and the real worlds and to make an impact, right? So how do you use virtualization as a mechanism to do prediction, a mechanism to do effective controls and operate better and also plan better?
I think that's a very important point. I think whilst you started off with AI in terms of understanding consumer patterns, energy usage, for us, again, in the industries, AI has started to impact in infrastructure lifecycle management in terms of how we design. Because in my time, I hate to say, when we used to build a railroad, right, the ability to write in contractual structures, planning, and things like that, we had to imagine it on paper. Experience, whereas now, like you say, you can use the virtual life to actually predict life cycling, predict implications, predict costs in a much more efficient manner, which all comes down to much better cost efficiency, much better planning efficiency. And we know statistically that in terms of life cycle and project management, a lot of the savings comes from the planning stage. There are some in the construction, some in the design, but a lot of it is in planning as well. So in that sense, I guess listening to all that, Ibu and Dr. Priyantha, I mean, how do you think, I guess, your institutions have been able to take all that in looking at how you support the infrastructure? And how do you think we can use that to, I guess, bring the financing in a much more effective way? Is it using better data for the banks? Is it consistency of disclosure? Understanding a priority pipeline. How do you see, your institutions have provided and will provide a lot of money, but we'll just need a lot more. So what's the next step in, I guess, bringing in the private sector from a funding perspective as well?
Yeah. Lynn, as I said, as you said, in fact, the requirements are enormous when it comes to financing requirements in developing the infrastructure sector. So which means we really need to bring in private sector. So one thing what we are trying to do is to see how we can leverage our sovereign investments as much as possible to bring in private sector investment. One area which we are really focusing on through our policy-based interventions. We have an intervention called policy-based. We disburse money to the government budget based on certain policies being achieved. So we try to focus these policies to ensure that it helps private sector investments as much as possible. If you take power sector, for instance, we try to bring in the required regulatory frameworks in place. As you know, Asia-Pacific region is not the best example when it comes to governance. So we try to bring in independent regulation And we try to bring in necessary policies for more cleaner development, clean energy development. We try to bring in regulations to make sure that government will not be spending money on things what private sector can come in. For instance, we ourselves, for instance, stay away from investing in clean energy generation, for instance, as through sovereign window. We think private sector is best placed to bring in money for generation side. So we try to bring in necessary, associated infrastructure to enable more and more private investments. One good example is the solar park concept, which ourselves actually put in India. You wouldn't believe I think our colleague is already here, the one who really handled that project, the solar park concept. What we did was we brought in money to set up the necessary infrastructure in the solar park and evacuation transmission lines so that private sector can come in and set up the solar generation plants. And that's the kind of thing which we are looking at from our side. So this is only one example. And eventually, as you know, now in India, it's a quite a normal thing that you have wind parks, solar parks, and so on, where sovereign investments are brought in to support the necessary associated infrastructure, whereas the generation itself is private sector's business. So that's replicated everywhere now. And in fact, in ASEAN region, you see the same thing happening. So likewise, we learn from this, experiences in various places and try to replicate this in other regions. And so as much as possible, we'll try to do that. And from the financing side, we roughly spend, we used to spend historically in the energy sector about 20 to 25% of the overall lending. This is roughly about $4 to $5 billion a year, used to be. But of course, during the last couple of weeks, it has gone down because of the pandemic and so on. Hopefully, we'll be able to pick it up back to those numbers. In fact, the expectation is within the next 2 to 3 years, it goes back to about $7 billion a year. Energy sector lending. Now, this of course, about 2/3 of that will be in sovereign investments. So those sovereign investments will have to be able to leverage much more private sector investments from other sources. And in that regard, we ourselves have put in what we call IFCAP. I can't remember the exactly, this acronym is IFCAP, where we try to put in about $3 billion to leverage about $15 billion of investments through guarantees. And recently also we have, within ADB, we had capital adequacy framework we looked at, where probably we will be able to lend another $10 billion more. And the issue is where the projects are, the project pipelines. So now we have to spend more time on developing pipelines. Financing, as far as energy ADB is concerned, we have now looked at the financing side, but where the projects are is the issue. The project pipeline. We don't have the projects if you look around. So that's another thing which we have to really concentrate on. These are a few things what I would like to put on the table for you to think about. Thank you.
I think those points are well taken. It's how do you leverage, use your capital to leverage private sector capital in, to not crowd out but crowd in, to de-risk that pipeline. How do you, spend the money to develop policies that create a holistic investment platform for long term. And finally, after you do all that, it's how do you create the bankable projects as well. And in that sense, I guess that's we lay out to all the financial institutions is, we have a part to play as, the DFIs to de-risk the projects. Project preparation, we know is not easy from infrastructure point of view. So at the pace of project preparation is slow. Hence, they always say there's a lack of a bankable pipeline. And I guess that comes down nicely to Ibu Sylvi in terms of PT SMI's role in how do you crowd in private sector by, in a way, taking perhaps more risk? Could I say that in terms of how do you catalyze it? Because that's, in part your role.
Okay, as a public development financial institution, that's part of our role. To not only providing the funding needs for the project, because the project, if it's bankable, then it can attract so many commercial loan or private investment. But what if the project that is marginal but impactful?
Exactly.
So I think that's part of our role. So we work together. We have the platform, like call it the SIO, SDG Indonesia 1, where we partner with the multilateral development financial institution, philanthropy, to make this happen. The blended finance, so we blend all the funding available, the product that's available from this partner, and we extend this into the project, from the project preparation until the financing of the project. Because when the project is up and running, it can attract commercial loan. It can attract the private investment. So yeah, that's part of the role that we actually perform. Not only providing the financing need for the project, but also helping them and build the capacity in particularly in the environmental and social, because we have implemented environmental and social safeguard in our decision-making process, and we want to build the capacity for the project to have at least the standard of the sustainability in the project, so they can attract the investor or lenders into the project.
Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left, and it's been we could continue for a long time as we have before this panel. I've got a couple of questions in from the audience. Please do submit your questions because this is a very experienced panel. I guess I've got one from, this is, can you share your insights on the bioenergy development in the APAC region? Because this will be potentially key to decarbonizing industrial equipment as well. I guess I'm looking maybe at Nilesh for that answer.
Yeah, I think maybe I would give chance to
Zul
others
as well, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've not dealt with biotechnology per se. Of course, biofuels offer a very good option right now, especially in Singapore. We are short of renewable energy locally. We are importing a lot. What else could we do? I think most industries, quite a few of our customers are looking at their near-term goals. And 2030 net zero is what a lot of companies have signed up to. And if you look at the options, more often than less, I hear bioenergy as one of the key levers that they will go to in terms of meeting their 2030 goals. Of course, they can wait passively until the grid decarbonizes in Singapore by 2050. But to meet 2030 goals, I think that's something challenging. And then that's where bio comes up quite up on the charts.
Pak Zul?
Yeah, so I think ASEAN as regions, we are quite pushing towards this bioenergy, both in biofuel, but also like biomass for co-firing and also for generations, including biogas as well. Like Indonesia, for example, we have B30 already, and we are pushing towards B40. Thailand has E80, so I think countries have their own policies to push biofuel. And I think from ACE perspective, it's very important because we do have the resources, we have the land to generate it, but of course the issue is how to make it like sustainable. So we're not, because of course there is an issue of the land utilizations, the competition, etc. How to make it sustainable is the issue. So it's very important solutions. As I discussed with you before, I think what's important for us is to understand what will be the key infrastructures that will be required to accelerate the energy transition, and also what are the solutions that we can do within ourselves. What can our local resources, the solar, the bioenergy, how we can utilize it for energy transition. So again, it's very important.
So given the importance of, I guess, bioenergy and where ASEAN is from an agricultural perspective, land, I mean, I guess back to Ibu Sylvi and Dr. Priyantha is, biomass, waste to energy, all these, components in there that are key areas, as well as solar and wind. I mean, is this something that as institutions you're pushing hard as well in recognition of exactly where the ASEAN nations are in terms of the fact that we are an agricultural region and urbanized.
Just to quickly touch on that, as far as our energy policy is concerned, we are very open to these technologies. In fact, bioenergy is one of them. And that's, I think, if I can remember right, that's even listed within the policy itself. But then, of course, at the same time, you have to be extremely careful of how to do that. One thing, you have to carefully balance the supplies. and to make sure that you will not end up with deforestation, for instance, when it comes to biomass-based power plant. In fact, recently there was a particular communication to ADB from an NGO to make sure that you may decommission all your coal power plant, but don't replace them with biomass-based power plants. So some of the NGOs are really concerned about it. But waste to energy is a very important part of, in fact, we are working on it very, very closely. But again, during our energy policy discussions, consultations, I can remember, there were NGOs which are coming very hard on us on including waste to energy as part of our policy. Simple reason, they think that recycling, reuse should be prioritized as against incineration, for instance. And so you have to definitely concentrate on this, but very carefully, the technology should be chosen and how to handle a biomass supply chain. That's very important.
So I think that's something that we had a question, and I think in part that answers it, is also, is there really a plan? There was a question from the audience in terms of how do you prioritize and how do you plan for collectively all the different sources of different renewable sources? So, we've got solar, wind, we've got hydro, which has been around for a long time. So let's not forget that and all the issues that come with it. Geothermal in Indonesia, we've all struggled with it as well, but it plays a part. And of course, the other clean energy that we've not touched on is clearly nuclear. Now, nuclear also within this part of the world is not so common for all the reasons that we've said. Certainly in Europe, it's an area of focus. So I think we're getting in some very good questions right at the end of our session, Lavan. What do we do? Do we keep talking? Okay. Thank you. So we've got one, which is that, again, in this plethora of renewable sources, have we been very clear where we're going to put our money to? We know solar power works because of costs and land issue. That's number one. Number two is regional power sharing. So that comes down to how do we collaborate better? We've got some cross-border grids. We've got hydro going across borders. Is there like a green corridor that we can invest in to amplify that? A couple of questions coming in is, bankable projects are limited to green projects, or do you make financing very clear, which is an area that we've been talking about, is energy transition projects. They're not totally green, but they are important in that movement there. And finally, I guess, we see the big economies playing a big role in ASEAN, to the north in I guess in China, to the east in India and things like that. So west, sorry, I can't do my geography, but I think these are big questions. So maybe I'll put it out to yourselves. Is number one is, do you think it would be helpful to look at how we prioritize where investment goes to the different renewable sources, given its difficulty in some areas? Do you think there should be more investment in cross-border and green corridors so that it engenders the collective sort of action to plan as well, like Singapore with its renewables import plan, with the green corridors we talked about in terms of grid transmissions? So I'm going to open it to anyone who wants to take that first cut at the answer.
I can give it a go. I think all this will have to come in parallel. It all depends on the geography, the regions you are working with. For instance, if you have a hydro-rich region, definitely hydro will have to be kind of a priority, because that's large scale, which can easily replace baseload power generation, for instance.
Yes. And
when it comes to certain regions, the regional cooperation is very important to share these hydro resources. If you take South Asia, for instance, you have enormous hydro resources in Nepal, Bhutan, which can be shared with the rest of the region. And so from that viewpoint, interconnectivity is very important. And some other areas, probably solar can be deployed very fast. Therefore, to solve some of the energy access issues and make it cleaner, solar comes as a priority. And then wind, similar, wind and solar I put together. Then, likewise, depending on the region and the country you are dealing with, your priorities may be slightly different. If you have a lot of hydro resources, definitely it's where you have to pitch your money in. A simple reason, that helps to bring in other types of renewables. because you can use hydro as a balancing factor in
That's
a
right.
grid, which is very important. So I shouldn't say that this is the priority for a particular country, because it depends on the country and the region. Thank you.
Yes, and they offer opportunities as well, right? If you're exporting hydro, you're building an industry, so it needs to be looked at very much more holistically. Yeah. Okay. We're running out of time. I've got a 1-minute call. I was going to ask, if I were to leave you with one point to share in terms of this big topic that all of you feel would be very important to leave with the audience, what would that be as we close out this panel session? Maybe I'll start with Pak Zul or Dr. Zul.
It's quite one point, but quite big point. But I just want to a little bit controversial by saying that you mentioned that money is not the issue, but actually money is the issue. And one thing that I just realized that the numbers keep increasing. Our analysis, IO7, for example, we see that until 2030 we need like 160 renewable energy. So meaning like 15 billion US dollar per year. Another scenarios in the longer terms, our study with IRENA say that for power sector only, we might require like up to 3 trillion US dollar for the next 30 years. So it's like 100 billion per year. You quoted the IEA just now, right? The 3 trillion globally. I just quickly checked before, but the number for Southeast Asia is around 150 until 250 billion per year. So the numbers keep increasing. And with our limited times until the net zero, etc., it will be even higher. So I think that it's still an issue. And so the quantity is also an issue, but how to access that is a bigger issue. How to prioritize that is a bigger issue. And I think for that, from ASEAN perspective, what we kind of require is to hear us more, understand us more, understand our priority. I think ADB, they have 5 pillars. ASEAN, we have 4 pillars. Security, accessibility, affordability, and then sustainability for all, or equity. So listening to us on that, and because the process is very long, but opportunity is people are realizing that energy transition is important, like climate sector, environment sector, they are open to invest in energy sector, but the process is quite long. We are exploring a project with Green Climate Finance. I think we start 4 years ago, and even now it's still not yet starting. So the due diligence is important, but how to accelerate that and in the way that really address the needs from us in ASEAN, I think that will be the problem. So the scale, the speed of access, and the understanding of the priorities that should listen more to the ASEAN perspective, I think that will be key for successful energy transition infrastructure investment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's well said. Ibu Sylvi?
Yeah. We only have a short time to achieve the net zero or the decarbonization. And we also need to understand that the emission or carbon is actually the global public goods. It cannot be solved by one country only. And because of the short time and the huge funding need to decarbonize the economy, the collaboration is very important among the countries, among the stakeholders. So we not only on the helping in the supporting in the funding, but also the innovation, because we only have a short time to decarbonize the economy.
Yes, I would put it in a more global context. The growth of ASEAN region is extremely important for the growth of the world economy, global economy, and to get millions of still poor out of poverty, because the global trading systems are all interconnected, and ASEAN is a very important part of it. And therefore, the growth of economy eventually is connected to growth of the energy sector. They are linked. Of course, as much as possible, we would like to see that de-link, but it's important to recognize that. So please do all what you can to make sure that whatever the growth in demand is met with clean energy sources. Bring clean energy, and as much as possible, bring innovation to the energy sector, and try to clean up at least the future demand, supply for the future demand with clean energy sources, while you try your best to decarbonize the existing fossil fuel stock. That's my appeal to the ASEAN region. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I would say digitalization as a key enabler for decarbonization. I think that's what we need to look at. Data centers today consume about 2% of the world's energy use, and it's only going to grow. Singapore has said very selectively no to data centers in the past, and selectively with more energy efficient data centers to enter over time. It creates economies around the region. It's going to be a key enabler. So I think if you use digitalization wisely, there's a lot of scope for optimizing the transition, because renewable energy is no longer a technology question, in my view. We all have the technologies available. 10 years ago, it was a technology question. Now it's really more of a policy question. The only technology that remains is probably the secondary part, which is the energy storage and hydrogen and the grid integration. And that's where digitalization also plays a very big role. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all your input. And I hope this panel session is a big topic, but I think it's a topic, frankly, of our lifetimes if we don't get it right. So, there is not one solution, but hopefully this panel and members sharing their experiences and thoughts have shown a couple of things. Is there's very, very good and proactive action and thought going to how we do this better. We have a very short time of doing it, so collaboration and clarity is important. Money, while correctly said, is not an issue. We still need a lot of it. So how do we use it as wisely as possible? But certainly decarbonizing the infrastructure sector is something, it's for all our benefits, our children's benefits, basically the world, and ASEAN is critical, I think, in this component. So thank you very much for your time. I hope this was interesting. Please do approach the panel members if you have further questions, and hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. To the panel, may we please invite you to remain on stage for a brief moment and leave for a group photo opportunity, please. Thank you once again to our moderator, Lynn To, Dr. Zulfikar, Yurnaidi, Ibu Sylvi Gani, Dr. Priyantha Wijayatunga, and Mr. Nilesh, Jadhav. Join me in giving them another big round of applause, please. Thank you.